For most of human history, a voyage to the moon was the fantasy of the addle brain or foolhardy, for only divine beings and supermen could make the journey. But then humans went aloft on mechanical wings, defying gravity and redefining the realm of possibility. And the moon was within the grasp of whoever would build the machine to take them there. The main requirement for making the fantasy a fact: perseverance, the wherewithal to solve the problems one by one over the long course of the endeavor. Problems such as how to make that first exploratory leap into the lifeless void of outer space. For without surviving that, no one would ever dare make the foolhardy yet divine voyage from the Earth to the moon. In the weeks leading up to any manned space mission, the crew and the spacecraft are put through a series of dress rehearsals, each one more like the real thing than the last. The plugs out test is just one of these. The crew is wearing full pressure suits, locked inside the hatch, confirming that the spacecraft can operate under its own power, with all the umbilical plugs connecting it to the ground removed. Even for the very first Apollo mission, the plugs out test was routine and hardly considered hazardous. For astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee, it was supposed to be just another long afternoon spent on their backs inside the Apollo 1 command module. Another test of the complicated vehicle that would someday perhaps take all three of them on a voyage from the Earth to the moon. The Avco Corporation in Lowell, Massachusetts employed about a dozen people, predominantly middle-aged women, to pump a special epoxy resin by hand with caulking guns into 380,000 one-inch square holes in the ablative heat shield of the Apollo command module. If X-ray inspection showed a bubble in one of the cells, they cleaned it out with a dental drill and tried again, for their product had to work perfectly for all of 6 minutes during the fiery re-entry of the spacecraft into the Earth's atmosphere at the end of the mission. Anything less than perfection could mean the death of the crew. So it was up to these employees of the Avco Corporation and hundreds of thousands just like them at other companies in almost every state of the Union to deliver without fail the goods that would make possible a voyage from the Earth to the moon. History tells us that the year 1937 was not a good one for the planet Earth. Japan invaded China. In Germany, concentration camps were already operating. A bloody civil war was escalating in Spain, and in the United States, President Roosevelt had cause to say that 1/3 of his people were ill-housed, ill-clad, and ill-nourished. And yet, in 1937, Picasso painted his masterpiece Guernica. John Steinbeck published Of Mice and Men, and the Golden Gate Bridge was opened. 1937, then, was not the cataclysmic year of the century. There would be others, including one when, in the midst of worldwide unrest, Americans were hoping to send 3 human beings on the very first voyage from the Earth to the moon. Before painting the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo had to first construct a massive scaffolding to allow him access to the ceiling without interfering with the chapel's daily use. He had to develop special wax models so he could study the lighting effects to be duplicated in the frescoes, and come up with a special slow-drying plaster. He suffered constant deadline pressure from frustrated church officials and the Pope, who just wanted the ceiling finished. The work itself was uncomfortable and unending, with wet paint and plaster dripping in the face of the man who was not, after all, a painter, but a sculptor. Such challenges arise in all the great works of human imagination, be they the creation of our world rendered upon the ceiling of a church, or the view of our world evident by making the voyage from the Earth to the moon. Apollo 11 might never have happened were it not for 3 very specific people. You've probably never heard of Sergei Korolev, but without him, the Soviet Union might never have put a man into space, nor stirred the competitive juices of his American counterparts. Wernher von Braun was the German rocket scientist who turned the weapons of World War II into the giant Saturn boosters of the space race 20 years later. John F. Kennedy brashly vowed to send a man to the moon and return him safely long before it was known to be possible. Korolev, von Braun, and Kennedy Working at a time when politics, economics, and technology were being defined by mankind's breaching of outer space, were the keystones in the bridge that carried another celebrated trio on their historic voyage from the Earth to the Moon. The great adventure of going to the Moon may never happen again in our lifetime. Manned spaceflight will continue, and there is adventure to be found in high Earth orbit. Robots have already gone to other worlds, the valleys of Mars, the clouds and moons of Jupiter, and there is a brand of adventure to be had in such a long-distance mode of human participation. But the satisfaction and the sudden emptiness of an adventure completed are intangible human concepts, and the argument can be made that mankind cannot bear witness to an event unless one of mankind has experienced the adventure firsthand. Not necessarily first, mind you, just firsthand. It is certainly not necessary to be Neil Armstrong to have experienced the great adventure found in a voyage from the Earth to the Moon. During their flight to the Moon, the crew of Apollo 13 made a live color television broadcast back to Earth that was largely ignored. Moments after the end of the TV show, an explosion occurred which put the lives of the crew in danger and made it impossible for any further pictures to be seen back home. The remaining dramatic days of the flight played themselves out by way of only the faint radio voices of the crew, the sketchy telemetry data from the crippled spacecraft, and the reports from a media that suddenly found itself as blind to the events as the rest of the world, a world which had become bored with TV shows from outer space. One of the biggest stories of the year became one with no TV pictures, only talking heads, all waiting to see whether or not 3 human beings would survive a voyage from the Earth to the Moon. With a flight that lasted just 15 minutes, Alan Shepard became America's first astronaut. In the parabolic suborbital arc, his tiny Mercury spacecraft climbed to an altitude of just 116 miles. He experienced only about 4 minutes of zero gravity. Couldn't see where he was going because there was no forward-facing window. And he splashed down just 302 miles from where he had started. Those 15 minutes in the spring of 1961 were just a taste of other longer flights America's first astronaut planned on making. But as fate would have it, Alan Shepard would spend his next 10 years wondering if those 15 minutes were all he was allowed in humankind's voyage from the Earth to the Moon. Along with the physical demands made of those who fly into space, other more particular demands were made of the men who went to the Moon. They not only had to have the acumen of pilots and engineers, they also had to have knowledge and practice as physicists, astronomers, geologists, and if possible, as historians and even poets and artists. The reasons to demand such Renaissance disciplines of the astronauts was simple. You will find no better record of what it is like to be on the Moon than in the experiences and recollections of the men who went there. If God is found in the details of our world, then the details must be discovered and interpreted by the men who make the voyage from the Earth to the Moon. Of the 24 men who flew to the Moon, 12 were veterans who'd flown in space before. 19 would never do so again, and 3 made the trip twice. The average starting pay for an astronaut was less than $20,000 a year, and whereas they could purchase brand new Corvettes at dealer cost, no one would sell them life insurance. All but one of the astronauts was married, and the wives of Apollo enjoyed the perks and handled the attention with varying degrees of success. The tough task they faced was to cope with an equal volume of stress as did their mates, making their time at NASA just as arduous, just as consuming, and just as adventurous as if they themselves had made the voyage from the Earth to the Moon.